Welcome to the BS and Beer Show, everybody. Sorry, Travis. Bear with me. This is my first time doing an introduction to the show. Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're comfortable and enjoying yourselves for this week's round where we talk about the Wall Assembly Sweet 16 or the Great Eight. What do we call it? The Elite Eight. So I'm Ben Bogie. I'm a project manager in Connecticut. Used to be in Maine, was in Connecticut before that. Been at this for 22 something years now. Tonight I am drinking actually something from my former state of Maine, a Bissell Brothers Substance, delicious hoppy IPA. BS and Beer is an independent grassroots movement to share building science knowledge through local meetup groups and this, our Zoom show. The brew crew and our guests volunteer our time each week to bring to you what we hope is a fun and informative discussion. We'd like to thank Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building, our partners, for helping us put this whole thing together on a weekly basis. And most of all, we all want to thank you for coming here and making this happen with us. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily for announcements.
All right. Hey, guys. Emily Mottram here in Maine. Still working on the cider. I don't know. It keeps me multiplying in my refrigerator, so I'm going to keep drinking it. Just a reminder about the chat box. If you don't know how to find it and you're new to the show, the chat box is probably flashing on the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you'll get to see the whole commentary from all of the audience members. Introduce yourself in the chat box. Let people know that you're here, because otherwise the only people who can see you are the panelists. So let all your friends know you're in the audience. But as a reminder, with the chat box, and you may have to do this multiple times tonight, you have to click all panelists and all attendees, or only the panelists see it. And I have been doing BS and Beer for a year, and somebody just asked for my email address and I only sent it to the panelists. So it happens to everybody every week. So all panelists and all attendees in the chat box. Fine Home Building sends out the Zoom reminder each week. If you want to receive those, as well as the information on what the guest is. So the Fine Home Building reminder is only going to remind you do have an event. If you want to know what the event is going to be, and you want those reminders, pop over to the bsandbeershow.com and get on our mailing list. Then you'll get reminders and the update on what the show is going to be about that week. Video recording for tonight will be up on the BS and Beer Show's YouTube channel tomorrow. You can also find it through Green Building Advisor's blog post, where you'll hear about what the show is for next week as well. And we invite you to continue the conversation on the blog posts if you didn't have a chance to get your questions answered during the show. The audio only version of the BS and Beer Show is also available on podcast players. I believe it's available on all podcast players that you can find the Fine Home Building podcasts on. So if you're a regular podcast user, you should be able to find it there, although the visuals from the YouTube channel are a little bit better. But if you can only listen to it, go ahead and do that. Next week, we have book club on April 1st. We are reading Essential Building Science. As I'm totally unprepared, Essential Building Science. If you haven't bought the book yet, it is a quick read. We will put in the chat box the link to this, and New Society Publishers has also agreed to give us a 25% discount on those books. So pop on over there and grab that book if you haven't read it yet. And even if you just want it and you haven't finished it, jump on for book club next week, where we'll have the author and a bunch of great guests on to talk about the book. I'm going to add the links to the chat box. That's it for, that's it for me tonight. The wall assembly competition is going to be live. What day, Travis? 2 weeks from now?
It's the 6th, 4/6, April 6th.
It's April 6th. So that will be when you get to hear all about that, other than tonight's conversation. So off to you, Travis, for intros.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Hi, I'm Travis Brungart. I'm in Kansas City. Not really. I'm in Prairie Village, Kansas, even though my byline in GBA keeps showing up as Kansas City, Missouri. I'm not from Missouri. I'm from Kansas. I'm serious about this. I have Kansas-based tattoos. I'm very much a Kansan. I'm drinking a Free State Brewery Guavatas, which is from the Free State. So again, Kansas. Anyway, that's enough about me. I am here representing both BS and Beer Show and also KC BS and Beer, which started this wall competition last year. But it's my privilege now to introduce the person who I passed the torch to for this year, and that's Connor Malloy. Connor Malloy is a professor in the School of Apprenticeship and Skilled Trades at George Brown College in Toronto. His teaching practice focuses on educating students about building science, managing residential build projects, and running efficient small-scale construction companies. Connor is a certified passive house tradesperson, has managed projects and design build companies with 250 residential renovations to his credit. Before focusing on the construction side of residential renovations and high-performance building, Connor spent more than a decade in the residential design industry, which shows in all of his work. That I added that part. Sorry, Connor. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Interior Design from Ryerson University and a Master's degree in Interdisciplinary Design Strategy and IADT in, oh man, I can't say that. Where is it from in Ireland? Help me out.
Dunleary.
There's no way I would have read that right. Thank goodness you were here. Connor, what are you drinking tonight, my friend?
I am drinking a Monogamy hops IPA from Bellwoods Brewery in Toronto.
Nicely done. And how are you today? We're excited to have you.
It's great. It's a lovely day. I mean,
you got a fresh cut.
This is my wife's attempt at a fade, which I have to say is incredible. And I don't know why I didn't tap her in our 10 years of being together until now, just for this show.
Golden opportunity.
I know, right? Yeah.
Well done, my friend.
Thanks.
I also get to introduce Christine Williamson, who is an internationally renowned building science consultant. She offers new construction risk mitigation consulting for residential towers, mid-rise mixed-use buildings, and production homes, as well as some of the most extraordinary private residences in the world. She's the founder of the Building Science Fight Club, an Instagram community dedicated to teaching building science and construction to architects and other building professionals. Christine received her Bachelor of Arts from Princeton and her Master of Architecture from the New School of Architecture and Design. I'm excited to have Christine here because she was the featured host of last year's show, but she's also a judge this year. And we're grateful that you could join us. Christine, how are you? Oh no, I promoted Christine. Where's Christine?
I'm here. I was just muted. I'm fantastic. This is great. I'm so glad to be here. And fun fact, so Connor and I connected again, well, really through this. And it turns out he's married to a high school classmate of mine.
That's crazy.
It's so weird. It's just such a small world. I just think that's funny. Anyway, tell Martha I say hello.
Yeah,
it's kind of adorable.
Only small school in Toronto. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it was a small school too. So that's kind of a small school, a big country, small population, still kind of cool.
Wild. Yeah, it's awesome. Awesome.
Are you drinking, Christine?
Yes, I am.
That's what I like to hear. What do you got there?
1664. It's a French beer that my husband and I have liked since our honeymoon. So it always feels good to extra good to drink this one.
That's a delicious beer. I've enjoyed that many times myself. I approve of your selection.
Oh, good.
I also get to introduce Mike Girton, which is going to be really exciting because I don't have his bio. So I'm just going to tell you what I know about Mike, and then he's going to have to fill in all the blanks. I know Mike from Fine Home Building, from JLC, from writing and sharing his knowledge with us. As long as I've been in the trades, you've been able to read and learn from Mike Girton. So we're really privileged to have him as a judge. We're excited to have him on the panel tonight at the show. But Mike's career in building and remodeling and knowing how to fix things is rather storied. So if that's an acceptable introduction, Mike, I will invite you to join the show and let us know what you're drinking. And I bet it's water from your well.
That's the nicest introduction I've had. Thank you. I wasn't planning to be here. I was going to be an audience. I was hoping to listen to everybody talking about the Sweet 16 and the walls and all that stuff. I've been diving deep into it in the last 3 days. How come you only gave us like 3 days to do this? At first, I thought it was Thursday of next week. And then when I looked, I said, oh, anyhow, I have an empty glass of water because I, again, wasn't planning to be here. Guess I'm filling in. So thank you.
As is typical of most builders and remodelers, you are highly adaptable and quick to jump into the situation. And we very much appreciate it. I know that Joe is disappointed to not be able to join us. He had a family thing, but honestly, we can make it work. We have all the information at hand. We have Connor here with the digital skills that I can only dream of. Connor built this fantastic website for this year's competition, and really,
Connor, that was so cool. I love it just made it so easy to look at what was going on and what we were supposed to do. Wow, what a great way of setting it up.
Yeah, that tool I'm in love with. Yeah.
It was perfect, except for you told us we could only move the small circles, but on my iPad, I could move all kinds of things. So I apologize to anybody who was doing it at 6 o'clock this morning because I was trying not to move things. I know I could see you, Mike. I'm glad I wasn't the only one who wanted another week. I'm like, I have so many questions. I want to write all these things.
That's stellar. We have to enable Connor to screen share, because for a lot of our attendees, we may not have who may not have had the access that the judges have enjoyed. There's some pretty cool stuff that Connor's been working on. I guess to give a little bit of background, again, we've already been over this. Last year's competition, a lot of fun, an Instagram competition, basically, where it was highly engagement based. You could vote for your buddy. You could have 200 people who knew you from being friends and partying over the years vote for you, who didn't know anything about walls. So you could potentially game the system and not have the best wall assembly to win. I'm not saying that's what happened. I think the cream always rises to the top. I know that when Mike Maines and Ben Bogey were in the final, no one was like, those guys don't know anything about building science. What happened. We had a great time. We had a great competition. But this year,
but it is almost unfair how charming those two are.
legitimate point. This year's a little bit different because frankly, I wasn't going to do it. And Connor kind of got at me and it's like, man, we could really make a difference here if we could make this a student competition. And he just took off and ran with it. We had a couple of discussions and then he did all the work. So I'm not going to steal his shine. I want him to be able to show off the cool stuff that he built. The website is amazing, wallassembly.com. And then the way you set this up for the judges, I think, is what people really need to see at this point to get an understanding of what's been going on. Because we did have 8 submissions. We actually had 9. And we're working on something special for that 9th submission. But why don't you take over for a second, Connor, and kind of tell us where we're at, how we got here, and your perspective on it.
Yeah, of course. I think the credit goes to you and the community really for starting this last year. This came at a time when our campus shut down. We're still remote teaching, month 13 now. And I reached out to you initially just to really give you props on how amazing last year's competition was. And I like to express my jealousy. And I was super jealous of what you created and how inspiring it was. And we connected to say, for me to prompt you, is it happening again? Because I want to make sure that our students have the time to get prepared. There's a lot of classes going on, so they can put some time in. And we can coach them. And I think when you said, well, I might not do it, my initial response is, what help do you need and what can we do from the school to help set that up? And we kind of ran with it. So it's been fun.
I think I said everything. I just need everything done for me and then we can do it again. And then you accommodating.
Yeah. Well, when I'm in my room for 13 months, I've got lots of time. So we can make these things happen. I think that's the fun part. We're all really busy, but it's such a fun thing to come together on. And I think people ask us, well, what really changes in walls from year to year? And from an outside industry perspective, you could say nothing. But from the student perspective in the industry, our perception of what walls can be constructed from, our understanding of what the layers can be, our understanding of control layers changes. And from a student perspective, I know when I was in design school, we went to a lot of competitions. You physically drove to a city like Montreal or New York. You compete against other schools in a weekend. And that was really fun and exciting. And when you left school, what was so hard is you were full of ideas, but you felt because you hadn't built anything yet, your ideas, your mock-ups, or your SketchUp model wasn't that exciting. And this is such a vehicle to take that SketchUp model or however the students submitted their ideas and have a healthy debate around the control layers and the performance and the cost to build them and the buildability. I think those are all really exciting subjects for trade students, architectural students, design students to all talk about. I mean, we build homes together. And I think the fact that you've got trade students and architectural students both designing wall assemblies shows you that we can learn each other's language a bit to be better communicators. So the fact that we could build this competition this year was 4 students that helps out students across America has been a selfish, jealous task that I'm glad we got to work on together.
There's a lot of things there too. I know I teach a sustainable design class, which is not being offered this semester, right? So when I reached out to the head of our department, she's like, man, this would have been great, and we would have done it the whole semester, which is essentially what we do in our class. But the one other thing I think you didn't touch on is this gives them access to building professionals in the field, which is the one thing that I get all the time in my class. Like, who can you introduce them to in the field? Who's practicing? I think Mike or Ben or someone commented on one of the submissions that was a retrofit. Like, even if you don't win, you get all these people who get to comment on what you're doing. I mean, what could be better?
It's so great. It's so great. You have a public critique of your wall from 7 professionals, from the building to the architectural side to the building science side. And that's really, there's just a great critique. And I think something as a student, you feel like your work is so insular, right? You submit it to a prof or your teacher. It gets marked, you get it back, and unless you live at home, you're not pinning it up in the fridge anymore. So where's it go? So the fact that people can give you comments, people that you respect and you admire, and the comments, are wonderful and they're thoughtful, and it's exactly what we wanted from this competition. So it's been exciting to put it out there. And Travis doesn't know this yet, but this is happening again, and then we can get schools ready for it and get it in their curriculum, so we can have a really great discussion.
I think that's fantastic. And I have to take you to task before you jump in, Ben. I assume you were going to tell everyone that you do have all your wall assemblies on your refrigerator. And I respect you for that. That's the kind of thing that just deepens my admiration for you. Please continue, sir.
Something that I really found that was interesting from looking at all these wall assemblies, kind of in the same vein, is you can kind of see a lineage in some of these wall assemblies of where some of these details are coming from. And for me, that's, it's humbling and exciting because it shows me that these kids are really paying attention to what people in the industry are doing. And they're, I thought I had seen everything, you know what I mean? Not trying to toot my horn, but I feel like I've seen every wall assembly you can kind of imagine. And I'm seeing stuff here that's a gumbo of all these different little details and put together in ways that I never thought of. And it's really cool to see that, that what we're doing is getting picked up by these students and they're taking it and running with it and coming up with new stuff.
I'm new to this whole thing, and I came in on short notice to be a judge. Can Emily or Travis or anybody give a little background to what you did last year and how you got the students involved this year? How did they learn about it? What type of students are these? High school students? Are they college students? Just a little bit. I think some of the people listening might not be familiar with it too.
That's a good point, Mike. I will give you the background on last year's competition, then I'll turn it over to Connor for this year, because he definitely took the reins and spun it in the right direction. Last year was open to anyone. We did an all call basically right after the pandemic hit. We're like, there's not going to be March Madness basketball. That's my favorite sport. What can we do that would be kind of fun? How about a Sweet 16 of wall assemblies? And we just put out a call on Instagram. Anyone that wanted to design one, submit it. We took we didn't actually take the first 16. We had 19 in, and we could only make the math work with 16. So I think Joe and I took our wall out of it. And then my lumber salesman submitted 2 walls, and I clipped both of them. One of them was really, really inefficient, but a really good commission check for a lumber salesman. So it was kind of in jest. I didn't really punish the guy. He's a good friend. He was willing to back out. So we had 16 assemblies. We worked through the same bracket that the college basketball system uses, Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final 4, Championship, but it was all done with basically crowdsourced voting. And so we were scrolling through the comments every night and tabulating votes. And each week we advanced another position in the bracket to get to a final between our good friends Ben Bogey and Mike Maines, who, without getting super complicated, decided that the best thing to do was to award the belt. And it quite literally was a heavyweight championship belt, like a boxer would wear, that says Wall Assembly Sweet 16 champion to Matt Bloomquist in Taylorville, Illinois, for his program. And really, I should let you explain that, Ben. Why did you and Mike do that?
I just didn't want to destroy Mike's wall assembly in public. I like him too much. No, honestly, I think Mike and I both really admired what Matt was doing and all the work that he was putting in, especially during COVID, to help the kids, and just, doing a really stellar job. And trades education is something that, is near and dear to my heart. I think it's near and dear to all of our hearts. So we felt like it was the right thing to do.
It was also a great wall. I mean, it really was. Not, obviously there's trade-offs that we account for in all kinds of ways, but in terms of building a high-performing wall that students can actually put together themselves, that wall was money. It was a good wall.
That's some high praise. I love it. So that's where we were last year. And that's one of the reasons that I was like, I'm not really going to do this next year. It was a lot of work. We were counting votes till all hours of the night. There were people starting multiple Instagram accounts to do, multiple votes. There was a couple of nasty comments that came out of it, and I just didn't want to be a part of that. We kind of got those in check. And I think, frankly, it was a good time for the industry to come together at a time where everyone was pulled apart. So that was cool, but too much work for me to be excited about doing it this year. Enter Connor Malloy.
Yeah, is it helpful if we show people some stuff from last year to see where it came from? So let me just pull up the feed. I mean, that's the great thing about IG is you can go backwards. So if you go to hashtag Wall Assembly Sweet 16. So can you see my screen here? Okay, perfect. All right. So this is when I got excited last year. We had just shut down. We were teaching remotely, learning how to do that. We're a bit better now, but still trying to make it engaging. And when I saw this come out and see the discussion, so if you go backwards, we can see, kind of the bracket you set up, where you had 16 entries down into a quarterfinal, semifinal, and final. And I think it's so exciting how you matched up walls and had those discussions with all of your rounds. And all the comments are still here. You can still see your voting, still see your discussion. And I think it's super exciting. And again, the whole thing about what I loved about the contest is it's not about your graphic skills. It's not about how complete the drawing is. It's about the ideas. You can see this is great. The drawing on the left, this might be simple, but it clearly communicates what the control layers are and what the assembly is against something that certainly takes more time to build, but they can compete on an open field. I think that's kind of what made me think about the student side. For students have different abilities, graphic and knowledge. So that's where you were last year. And I think what you had mentioned is doing this over 4 successive weeks for every show to get down to that first wall is a lot of time and pretty drawn out. So what we were thinking was this year, how do we take that challenge of the Sweet 16? How do we elicit 16 submissions, compare them fairly for students, give them feedback, but do that in a way that we're only doing 2 shows, 1 show to launch it, and then 1 show to get through like the top 3 or 4 to try and find a winner. So the way that you and I hashed it out was, and I'll pull a site up here, is, when you do teach students, you start to get better at how to communicate what exactly you want to help them learn and then help them be assessed on to give them really constructive feedback. So that's where we built the website. I'll pull it up. So that is, wallassembly.com. That was free. So I snagged that about 6 weeks ago. We built the site out in about 2 days. We built the website and wrote a brief so that students anywhere across North America, whether they were in public school, a high school, or a college or university, could all enter for free, no matter what their skill level was. So I
love that you got the website too.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is crazy. It's great.
Yeah, usually I have to settle for like a .ca. Nothing against .cas, but like .com is kind of has more power to it. And when wallassembly.com was free, I was like, we're building a website. We're making this happen.
We're not building a website, Connor.
Yeah,
we're building an empire.
That's right. And Ben was gracious enough to give us access to his graphics from last year to populate, just to show people just an idea of what this thing was about. So we built the site out. We had a timer going down. So it was live for, I think, 19 days or 17 days. So students had about 2.5 weeks to put something together. We sort of laid out the concept for the competition, which was we wanted it to be open to a student in any climate zone. So if you were one of our submitters is from climate zone 3C on the Southwest coast, or if you're from Northern Ontario and you're in a 6A, how do you both compete in the same competition very different labor markets, very different access to materials, and try and make a contest where everyone can kind of come together and learn. So the idea was keep it simple, have a one-page description of your wall against the criteria we came up with, 4 to 5 drawings of your assembly to explain, its layers, its components, the control layers, and kind of what your goals are. This year we have a couple of retrofits, which are really interesting, against 6 other new construction. So the goals are important. And then we spent most of our time early coming up with this criteria. So if you have students from 3 to 4 levels of academic study, they're from 8 climate zones, from East Coast, West Coast, how do you come up with some kind of rubric we can all kind of play with and then have some discussion around? So we broke down, Travis, can you help me remember again the podcast where we got this inspiration from?
Yeah, it's the Green Architects Lounge, which is available on greenbuildingadvisor.com with Phil Kaplan and Chris Briley. They don't do enough pods because they're extremely successful and good at their jobs, but their podcast breaking down basically a comparison matrix of exterior cladding materials was sort of the inspiration for how we tried to break this down, and Connor nailed it with this.
It's great. Yeah. For the cladding was like, how do you compare if you have access to, white cedar shake parts of Maine, and that's more cost effective for you. If I try to use that up in Ontario and had to ship it and bring it in, it's very expensive for me. So for you, it might be very local and maybe low carbon and affordable and durable. But for me, those metrics aren't the same. So we wanted a way to compare a wall on 6 kind of levels. One is performance. So looking at how the wall performs both thermally and perceived air tightness through the detailing. Then looking at buildability. So if you're really into prefabricated assemblies and CLTs, how do you factor in using a crane or specialized crew, or even the materials you're specifying? Can you buy them at your lumberyard and put them together, or do you require 8 to 14 week lead time to bring these things in from parts of Europe? Durability is a big one. As we learned, really water management is our number one task here. So we look at these buildings, how durable are they given their assembly and how they're detailed? Embodied carbon is certainly something we're becoming more aware of where we are, and certainly in our teaching practice. So not just concerned about the end goal of the performance, but if our goal is to build an efficient assembly or home to reduce energy, it's really about reducing carbon if you really look at it. So when you're looking at your assembly itself, how much embodied carbon does it take to build that high performing assembly to then save carbon down the road? So something that we should just be aware of when we're designing and teaching now. And then cost. Cost is a big one. Given your performance goals and what you've achieved, how much did it cost you to get there for the client, kind of client type you're designing for? And then the last one is sort of looking at, this is really like a loose life cycle analysis. When that building is renovated later, taken apart, dismantled at the end of its life, are the components, materials that you have selected, do they have a potential recyclability, reuse, or what's the relative toxicity? So those are kind of the 6 metrics we came up with for some kind of rubric for the competition. So competition, people had 2 weeks. We through just debate with colleagues in the industry without any idea for this, we pulled up some amazing sponsors that were really excited by the idea of supporting a student competition and supporting a winner, but just learning and debate. Rockwell came out to support, Sega North America, Fine Home Building, MT Copeland, producing amazing online content for learning. Emu Systems is going to we'll talk about this in a second, model some of the winners. Huber Engineered Woods, Endeavor Center out of Ontario is going to help us with the embodied carbon modeling. T-Stud and Intelligent Membranes out of the UK. So that's the basics of the competition. And then we have amazing judges. What's not to love here? Travis, do you want to talk about how you got judges? Do you want to jump into?
I would be happy to.
Awesome.
The judges can't get enough credit here, because where we had crowdsourced votes last year and it was, oh, poor me, I had to count votes for a couple hours. These judges had so much information to dig through on these assemblies because they're so thoroughly designed and there's so much information about them. The first text that I got when the judging board opened up was from Emily. She was like, oh my gosh, I just spent the last hour just on the first matchup, which is probably more time than anyone spent voting in the entire competition last year. And so I want to give the judges a tremendous amount of credit for the amount of time they've invested in this, because this is their profession for the most part. And they've been incredibly generous to invest hours upon hours of giving constructive criticism with their scoring of these assemblies thus far. So let's scroll through the judges and give credit where credit is due, because they all generously volunteered their time. Even Mike Gurton, who came in to help us out when Mike Maines got overbooked, he didn't say, oh, you'd have given me more notice, I would have done it. He just dug in and got after it. So
Mike's comments are so good too. We'll get to them later, but I'm glad that I came after Mike so that I could see what he had said previously on the walls. Great comments, Mike.
You always come in to judge last.
Right?
I wanted to be like, can I just put like a check mark next to all of Mike's comments? Like, yeah, I agree. Yes.
Well, and also I want to like with some of them, and also I wanted to like screenshot the comments so that I'd remember them from my own stuff. Like they're good comments. And actually that's something worth saying. I hope that someone communicates this to the students at some point who actually submitted these walls, that sometimes I know certainly I remember from being a student, I felt like I was in the position of being judged. And that's natural because you're a student, you're constantly being evaluated. That's sort of your job. That's your role. And you've got people who provide you with feedback professionally. But this also happens in a professional context all the time. And in fact, you pay people to do this later. And anyway, so the comments that we're providing are the same type of comments that every single one of these judges is used to also receiving. So like you don't reach an end state where you make a submission for something like this and there are no comments. Like that's what makes this industry so interesting, that there's always room to discuss and tweak and change and adjust based on whatever the context is. It's not, you don't get to perfect ever. There's always trade-offs, and that's what makes this really fun. So I hope that the students know that too, that just because they get a lot of comments on their wall doesn't mean that it constitutes a failure. It means that they've produced something interesting enough that professionals have something to say about it.
Christine, you had something that you posted on Instagram a handful of weeks ago that really struck me. And it's that when people talk to like a building scientist, it's not that they're talking to somebody that's phenomenally intelligent or gifted. It's just that person's had a chance to think through that situation already and come to an answer. It's not that any one of us here that are on the judging panel are, these gifted, brilliant people. We've just, learned through experience. And that's all we're doing, is we're able to share what we've already been through. It's not that we have some magic powers.
It's a great point, Ben. I think it is worth rolling through the judging panel just to kind of help people understand why we picked who we picked, because it wasn't thoughtless. Much of what we do may look thoughtless, but in this case, Connor and I talked a lot of about this.
This is my co-judge, by the way. Picture, so we've got the elder and then the junior is here. The elder is sleeping on the couch and junior, Pancake. Hi. She helps.
Panel just got a lot cuter. Can't deny.
Don't want to undercut the contribution of the canine component.
So next year we'll have Pancake instead of Steve, and I don't think that
Pancake might have a larger attention span. I'm not sure.
I had dinner with Steve last night, and he was very excited about being engaged in this. Obviously, Steve's experience speaks for itself. His time at Building Science Corp and as a successful architect. Obviously, Christine's contribution. If you don't know Building Science Fight Club on Instagram, you probably aren't in this audience. There's so much great content there. The classes that she's offering now for architects, tremendous resource there. So those two judges, a no-brainer. Steve competed last year in the competition. Ben, obviously, the forefront of building science monitoring, a builder in the field who has that hands-on understanding. It's not just theoretical. It's not just design. It's in the trenches, mud in my boots, bags are heavy and sweaty. How do I get this stuff to stick together? That level of knowledge, coupled with his understanding of building science and his participation as a finalist last year, made him a pretty easy selection. And of course, Matt Bloomquist, who has the belt. He's got the belt. He's got to be in the game. The reigning champion has to be part of the tournament. So we wanted to get Matt's input. Also, Matt, as an instructor, has a tremendous value in his set of eyes the student understanding is something that I can't reproduce. I don't have that perspective. I'm old and still just a builder and still learning building science, but definitely not able to understand this the way that Connor and Matt and Emily, as you scroll up. Emily, I always forget that she's an instructor, and it's so silly that I forget that, because Emily's a great friend and I talk to her all the time. But Emily, can you talk a little bit about your teaching experience? Because I know that I tapped you as a judge because, and actually I think it was Connor that was like, well, obviously Emily. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, obviously. As a building
Thanks, Connor.
You're
welcome.
No,
You're welcome.
This is what happens, is like your friends and your family have no idea what you actually do, right? They're like, everybody like, if you asked your family what you do, they're like, like, I don't know, she's like an architect, whatever. No, I've been teaching for I don't know, a number of years, and it all started when I was doing more energy consulting, and I was teaching energy classes and energy auditing, because there were so many people who wanted to know, like, what can I do to improve my own house? But I was a licensed architect, and the head of the architecture department took my class and then was like, oh, can you just teach this to the architecture students? And by the way, we want to create a certificate program, and can you teach it to the construction kids too? And that's sort of what happened there. And we only offer it once a year usually. And so they usually take it as seniors, right? So they take my more advanced level class, at least the architecture students do, after they've learned how to draw a regular assembly. So we start with like the regular assembly and we work up to a high performance assembly, which is a lot of fun. And I was actually kind of disappointed we weren't teaching the class this semester. It's not alive till the fall, because the students, with all of the students that I had last year that took it, all graduated. So they no longer are, they couldn't participate in it. But I said something to Mike like a million years ago, before, when Mike and I first started, I was on a panel and I said, those who educate own the market. And I really believe that. It's a struggle when you're an architect, and I'm sure Christine can talk to this about what you don't know, right? And so I want to share all the things that I've learned, because that's the only way that everybody else learns it, right? There shouldn't be any reason why you hold anything in, and that's why I teach. So,
well said. I have to clear something up about the next judge on the panel, and that's Jake Bruton. A lot of people think that I wanted Jake on the panel because he's an adequate friend, and also I'm glad I got you with that, Emily. That was where I was going with that. He's an adequate friend, and also to be perfectly frank, it's because I've learned a lot from Jake, and he made building science more attainable for me. The focus on using the materials available in your local lumber yard and not overcomplicating things to achieve the desired results is something that I can't stress enough how formative that's been for me personally, but certainly throughout the competition. And really, I think throughout our industry, that's something we should all be sort of aspiring to, is to keep these things as simple as possible, because failure is usually as a result of complexity or, installer error. Contractor to verify, I believe, is how that usually goes, is where failure arrives. Isn't that right? Contractor to field verify. So that's why we wanted Jake on the panel. Plus, he's a lot of fun to stir the pot. Him and Steve probably could argue this whole thing out and entertain us for hours. The last judge that's on the screen here is our good friend Mike Maines, the founder of BS and Beer, who, as with everything, Mike Maines says yes. If you ask Mike, he says yes. And then he has 24 projects, 16 houses to build, 20 to design, and a life to lead. And so he said yes. And then we realized that Mike has too many things to do right now. And we asked who he would think would be a good substitution. And so he said, I think an upgrade would be my good friend Mike Gurton. So we don't have Mike's bio up here, but I gave Mike the introduction that I believe is most sincere from my perspective. And I can't give him enough credit for stepping in at the last minute without knowing as much about the competition. He didn't know what he was getting into. So what do you think, Mike, now that you're in it, now you're deep in the weeds, what are your regrets? How soon would you like to be out of this?
He had to pop off he had an emergency, so he had to pop
didn't see
off.
that.
So you fill in the blank here, right? He wasn't up. We didn't have a bio. He's not on the judge panel. So
I
insert.
just assumed that I had offended him, and
You
for
did.
not having his photo up, he's like, "Well, if I'm not on, I'm not on." And
He's like,
I didn't
"Peace
do the
out.
website, so
Forget
that's
that."
on you, Connor. Good luck.
I take that. It's happening right away. It's happening really, really quick. Well, Mike's been amazing. It's been incredible. All the judges, their evaluation, their feedback, but Mike's initial comments got me so excited. And we'll share what we're kind of up to right now with the voting. But I think initially when we set this up, we didn't anticipate sharing everything, but the comments are so thoughtful and so good that we have to share the entire thing. And I think we could make it public at a point if there's no private information in there. And you can see it all. The more that we can share and use that board as a teaching tool is great. It's really great.
Yeah, I think we almost have to, from what everyone else is saying. Go ahead, Ben.
I've just got to pump the Girton mystique a little bit. I was on at 11 o'clock the other night, like bleary-eyed, just trying to read through some of the wall sections, and Mike was like frantically tapping out brilliant notes on everything. And I'm like, he doesn't sleep. I'm pretty sure he doesn't sleep. So
He's a bit of a machine. He was probably in a well casing while he was firing that off. He was making repairs with one hand and operating the keyboard with the other.
He was on this morning with me at 6 a.m. too. So
they're so good. Like my email gets a response every time someone logs in, and it's just my Girton, my Girton, my Girton, my Girton, my Girton. And I've never been so excited to have a name pop up in my inbox. I texted 6 friends. I'm like, look, he's not emailing me, but he's on the board I made. So good.
He answers, maybe I shouldn't say this publicly, but oh well, I already am. So he apparently answers all of his DMs in Instagram, which is crazy to me. Like, he's just so attentive. I love how much he cares about people who take the time to reach out to him. I'm just amazed. He's got to get a ton of them. I get a ton of them. I try to answer too, but I'm not Mike. I'm not as good as Mike. What can I say?
this is like an episode of the Unbuild It podcast where you talk about whoever's not on because they're really awesome.
That's perfect. We did want to, now that we kind of laid out the old competition, we've talked about who's judging the new competition. We talked about the criteria. We should probably talk about the submissions, right? Like, we got some really good assemblies. We got some, Christine already alluded to.
I have
really
a favorite.
impressive.
I have a favorite already. I have an early favorite.
Ooh,
And like, I want to see it built. I dig it. Like,
can you screen share the individual submissions, Connor? Is that going to be complicated?
I'll pull it up. And what's so exciting is one of the sponsors, T-Stud, has committed to building or helping supply the materials to build the winning wall. So we can make this thing and share it. And I think it's super, super exciting.
awesome.
Yeah, I know. Killer. Okay,
That will be awesome if it's at least 2 of them have T-studs in it. So
T-Stud did clarify that it does not need to contain T-Studs.
That's very big of them.
That is.
And while you're pulling that up, just to quickly give the sponsors a tremendous amount of credit, we didn't like rattle any cages. These folks kind of reached out and were like, hey, you're doing this again? Oh, and it's going to be for students. How can we get involved? How can we help? I can't ever give Dan Edelman enough credit for the stuff that Rockwell has done just in the BS and beer community. He's fantastic. This is fantastic. Sega was immediately on board. Sean McStay, I talked to him on his podcast and he was like, yeah, to just tell us how we can help. North America side, let's get Etienne involved. I mean, everyone right down the line. Mariano wanted to get involved in the competition last year at EMU. And so it's just one after another. Mark Willie at T-Stud, Chris at Huber, Brian at Fine Home Building, everyone that is on this. And the one that's really fun is Intelligent Membranes, who was just watching the previous show introducing the competition. And we were just talking about sponsorship. And he was like, hey, it's, what was it, like 2 a.m. in the UK? He's like, I've got $200 to throw at this. We'll sponsor. How can we help? So I just wanted to give the sponsor a shout.
So good. Yeah. Amazing sponsors. So here's the kind of bracket. Do you want to go into how it's set up, or do you want to talk
let's
through?
Talk about the seating.
Perfect. So here's our bracket. So I think there's a couple things come out of this. I think that we should talk about initially is this is intended to be the Sweet 16 wall assembly with 16 walls. And the one thing I think we have to admit is the education space is something that we all need to help sponsor and start a dialogue with, because we create a competition. I teach at a school for students. We reached out to all the schools that we know, and in 2 weeks, 8 amazing submissions. We would love to get to a place where next year we have a complete list of trade schools and artificial schools with building science courses and programs to get this in front of them, have a bigger debate with, ideally all climate zones, and get there. So this year we're starting with the Elite 8 of the Sweet 16. These are all 8 very considered submissions, some from high schools, some from colleges, some from universities, and across the spectrum from skilled trades, shop courses, and architectural masters. And it's really exciting 8 submissions we have this year. And it's so the way this is set up is we jump right into the quarterfinals. We are looking at having the 7 judges all look at the 6 criteria, and they're individually voting on each assembly so that we can take the average score and then look who moves on to the semifinal. Those teams, the 4 teams that move on to the semifinal, so that we get to learn a bit more about them, EMU Systems has graciously committed to helping us performance model those assemblies, look at their performance, look at their resistance, look at the potential thermal bridging in them, give us some more information when we get to the final show for the semifinal and the final. And then also Endeavour Center and Chris Megwood out of Ontario have published a new tool, Beam, to look at embodied carbon. And they're going to help us actually look at the assemblies and look at the materials and approximate some of the embodied carbon. I think for like a learning system, for me at least, and maybe for people here, just another metric we have to learn about these assemblies. So all the semifinalists will be modeled for both embodied carbon and performance. The final show on April 6th, this bracket here in the center, when it's populated, those 2 will be selected by the judges, and also live voting on the April 6th show. Then we have a winner. So what we did is to make this a bit easier, because we're not kind of working live and having a live discussion, this is a teaching tool that I use. It's called Miro, and it is basically it's a design thinking tool. So you can lay things out, you can make comments, you can make maps, and it's a wonderful tool. So what we did is we set up all of our quarterfinals, we dragged in the documents, and when Travis and I went through the bracketing, we wanted to put walls that were either like in terms of assembly or their goals, or 2 were like in climate zone, and ideally both. So what we have initially is we have 2 retrofits. We have a retrofit, it's a multi-family building in New York. I think in Brooklyn, that's climate zone 4A. We then have a retrofit down here in Toronto, and that is to a single family dwelling, and that's climate zone 5A. And then we put together 2 pretty exciting assemblies, one from a architectural university, another from a trade high school, climate zone 5A double stud wall assembly with wool, and then climate zone 4A, a single stud wall assembly using zip R and ICF. We then put together 2 competing walls out of climate zone 5A out of Toronto, a sort of modified double stud wall assembly, and then a CLT assembly using exterior Gutex and exterior WRB and air control layer.
I love this wall. I love that one. I love it so much. I want to see it built. I think it's awesome. Was that from
book?
I didn't see those people. Were they from George Brown?
They are from George Brown, and they're
of course they are. Of course, are they your students?
They are my students. Yeah.
Rock star students. You tell them.
I will say that it was a bit church and state. I wanted to help create with Travis and with PS and BRKC a program that was really open and unbiased. So my colleague Shane McInnes, who teaches at the Endeavour Center and also George Brown, really helped them set up their ideas and act as a bit of some support. So that was exciting for me to see what they've come up with. And the last one.
Sorry, I'm not going to weight my judging in any direction, but that wall assembly right there has been my hypothetical dream wall assembly for a couple of years now.
Right?
I just haven't found somebody that's going to pay me to build it. I'm working on it.
That one. It's so.
There's one actually very local to me that was done by Opal Architects. This exact same assembly that I was at my uncle's wedding 2 years ago, just driving around. I think we're having some beers. And I stopped because I saw all these 475 products, and it was a CLT structure like this, wrapped in like 8 inches of Gutex or 10 inches of Gutex, and blew my mind that I saw one in the wild. So they do exist. It's
so exciting. I saw the handle built tight at SIGA posted a wall today that was CLT laminated with, I think, 8 inches of rock wool on the outside. Really exciting product. And then the last two is out of Climate Zone 3C and 4C, different goals, but same climate zone, and we felt they were the best fit to put together. So that's kind of how we did the brackets. So one of those will go on to the semifinal, but maybe we'll just zoom in and give, I guess, like 2 ideas. So when we were trying to make this workable, and you can tell us, Christine and Ben, like how this was for you, I was trying to find a way to get 7 people to vote on the same documents, but make it interactive and make it shareable. And we came up with this board where each of the 7 judges, I turned their face into a voting poll. We'll just zoom in here. So each face is a vote.
So did Steve really vote for this wall? Steve is colorful, I know. Are these his real votes?
Well, I think you can see a cursor there. That might be Steve right now, live. I can turn his.
Oh, that's so funny.
I think he's moving Bogey around, though. He's changing your votes, Bogey.
Oh, that's funny.
No,
that was a downside. I accidentally moved Christine's head once.
Oh.
And I was like, she hadn't voted yet, so I just put you back off to the side. But I was like, whoa, oops, you can move more than your own head. Don't do that.
I didn't even try. I don't know what that says about me. Maybe I'm not bold enough.
I've been screenshotting after I vote to make sure there's no hijinks happening when I'm not looking.
Yeah.
So many shenanigans at stake.
What's kind of cool though about this is, I mean, you could tally this up, but when I was looking at, so I considered each entry in comparison with the other one in its bracket. So I looked at both. So there was a context to the voting.
Yep.
But when you do it like this individually, I don't actually know which ones like actually won from if I were the only judge. Like I didn't add it up where I'm like, oh, I gave an average score of 8.6 on this wall and only 7.4 on this other wall. So this one's, I don't know. I didn't even know, which I think is actually kind of good for the setup. It's not so much what walls we individually prefer. It's how do we assess them on the specific criteria that's been provided.
That's exactly it. And that's how, like when I learned how to teach professionally, it was, how do you not just look at what you like, well, that's an A, that's a B, and that's a C, and I'll put stuff in the middle. But how do you, if you have a really healthy rubric, how do you look at the rubric individually, absent of name or school or ability, and just look at it on its merits against what you asked them to do?
Right.
And when you do that, it's amazing how accurate you can be and how clear your feedback can be. And it's great that's worked out. That's great.
One of the things that I thought was interesting is so I got in early. I think I was the first one on the board, and I got some votes in, which was I kind of enjoyed that because it was like there was no input or bias happening in front of me. And then I came back the next night, and there had been a handful of votes cast, and you could kind of start to see trends in how everybody was voting, which was both interesting and also kind of frustrating because it made me second guess myself and be like, is this really where I think this is? Or am I kind of, cognitively biased right now? Because I see that there's like 4 votes in that same range. So I don't know what that means for next year. If I'd rather just vote by myself without seeing the input, maybe see the notes, but not see where other people are, because I don't know.
I was thinking the same thing. I don't want to
It's
see,
kinda cool to
I want to see their notes, but I don't want to see their voting. And I don't want to see the names and the location, like the schools the students went to. Not that I know enough about schools, but I think that if you knew somebody, you know, would you be harder on the voting? Like if one of my students submitted something and I was being really good about it and not helping them, and I saw my school, would I be harder on them because they were my student? I don't know.
In that same vein, Emily, something that as I got into this and started just to look through it, before I even, so we have the descriptions from the entrance here. I actually intentionally skipped over any of the descriptions or storyline or anything that they told and went right to the sections, because that's, you know, professionally, that's where I am every day. I'm looking at sections. So I allowed myself to kind of just base it off of what my immediate reactions were without kind of any input or coloring from where they were trying to direct the narrative, so to speak, you know, because everybody's trying to tell their own story about what they've created. And I just wanted to try and stay as impartial as possible and remove that. So I went right to the wall sections and then went back to the narrative if I had any questions or wanted to really see what the thoughts were behind it.
And I mean, for us from a system, it's really great feedback, because when we created this tool, we did it really quickly, you know, in kind of a vacuum. And when you have 7 amazing people come on, it is about feedback and how you improve that process. And then for students, yeah, there is a way in the future with this tool that if you vote, you can actually we can have you hide your votes so that's more anonymous, and they're only released at the very end, and they can tabulate. So
I do think it's nice to see what's rather than having it aggregated, because it's actually most interesting when you see some dissent among, or I guess that's the wrong term, but when you see, like, if one person is actually in that one, look, I'm giving, if you go up to that other wall, I'm ranking something a 6 in terms of durability, but most other people are around 9. Well, that's an interesting conversation. Why are we doing that? And now, actually, in retrospect, I feel like maybe I was a little too hard on them for the 6. But anyway, that's where you learn something, right? And I think that's valuable for students in the fun, and actually anybody participating, saying, okay, why is it that people who are very good at their jobs and are experienced and thoughtful view these things differently? Like, that tells an interesting story about professional judgment. And a lot of this stuff, it's not about what's right and what's wrong. It's about developing good professional judgment. And so the explanation or the story of why you see those disparities in the votes is more valuable, I think, than even than the final vote cast, right? It doesn't give you, the interesting thing is the justification, not the number.
And I think that speaks back to the way that the judges were selected, were the very broad understanding and background. Because frankly, I'm hoping that Jake would represent my ideas and that Ben would represent my ideas as a builder, having to put these things together. I hope you guys penalized the ones that were really complicated with 10 or 12 different components. That's hard to put together in the field, and it costs a lot to have all those different supplies. But I tell you what, I'm going to lean like hell on Emily's perspective when it comes down to the life cycle analysis and carbon. She understands that way better than I do. So I don't know how to judge that as well as she does. And so I think when we have these broad perspectives, which is what we're hoping for from the submissions every year, we're getting a much better picture, a better understanding of how we can improve and what will work in different places. I think that's so valuable. And that's been something that's really rewarding for me about this whole thing, is learning things that I would never have thought of if not for these brilliant students and their ideas. It's so exciting.
Something that I can just say is, and I think I saw Christine and I know Mike Gerton was doing the same thing on the subject of carbon. I didn't cast any votes in any of those sections because I can guess, but I don't want to influence anything that's being said or disseminated around the subject of carbon unless I have a clear-cut answer. So I withheld any voting on that. And the way I approached life cycle analysis, because that's also kind of a very blurry subject, you know, you can steer life cycle analysis reports kind of in the direction of what story you want to tell based on what facts you pick. There's actually an article on GBA about this just the other day, that it's really kind of a blurry subject. On the life cycle analysis stuff, what I thought about is, my background in taking apart buildings, and how much I would actually be able to, separate out sections of that for recycling or for reuse, kind of from that aspect. And I hate to say it, most of it, it's pretty much all, a large amount of it's going into the trash. It's nice to think that we're going to pick through that stuff, but that's sadly
In
not the case.
fairness, after I texted Travis the first time, he said, this is supposed to be fun and it's just supposed to be your gut reaction. And so when I came to embodied carbon, since there, especially early on, there weren't a lot of people who had already voted, I was like, okay, well, based on my experience, these are things that I know are better than other things. So that's how I ranked my embodied carbon, because I knew that when it gets down to the lower end, they're going to do a better analysis than I can, for who last 4 or last 2 or whatever. So I ranked it based on what I've used and what I'm like, yeah, I spent a lot of time with Mike Maines and he would say that's not good. So.
And I didn't vote for the opposite reason, or I agree with you, but I don't think actually that they're better than you, Emily, which is why I didn't vote. Is that I think these, this is not to say that carbon doesn't matter. I believe that it does intensely matter. I think a lot, a great deal. However, I think that parsing the carbon contributions, the disparity, the differences in embodied carbon in individual materials is parsing this down to a level in which we don't really fully understand well enough to make that a primary influence on the design overall, which is very different than saying it doesn't matter. That's a very different. I want to be very clear with that. It's not that it doesn't matter. I think that we don't know enough about it to be making decisions that are as intelligent as they otherwise could be. I think it's important that it's included as a criteria, and I also recognize that I'm one person and that other people, including people on this panel, but including lots and lots of people who are not on this panel that I respect greatly, have a different opinion on this. So I think it's important that it's included, but I think it's another indication of how this is actually really helpful to look at not look at the final answer, but look at how we've arrived at these decisions about pitting one wall against another, and this being just another factor, but that there are differing opinions as to which of these is more or less important. For example, durability is only one judging criteria, but I think 100% of us on the panel would agree that if something is that's something that could disqualify a wall. Like if it were truly in real life, you can screw something up so bad that it doesn't matter if it aced every other category. If it's not gonna last, it's not gonna last. So it's, I think, really important to look at these holistically and recognize that all of us have different weights, even though in the contest, we're weighing these things equally because we have to do something for a contest. But in real life, we all put different emphases on individual criteria or another. And a lot of that depends on context too, right? So this is sort of blank slate. This is like hypothetical new wall. There's no client. There's no, I mean, we're sort of allowing the students to sort of define their own context in terms of whether it's new construction or a retrofit and what climate zone they're in. But in real life, there's way more context than that we use to make our decisions. And that actually particularly influences life cycle, which I also didn't vote on, in that, like, well, what kind of building is it? Who's the client? What are their intentions? I think life cycle analysis is really important to pay attention to, but it's very, very contextual. And I don't think we have quite enough information here to judge that on. So anyway, my 2 cents on that.
To kind of pick up on that thread and just kind of put things a little further into perspective, I fully support us diving deeply into carbon. but you can take the most carbon light storing, sequestering building that we can possibly imagine and put it on a beautiful hillside. And then we spent 6 months of trucking material in to terraform that site to make it, this whatever. And you've just thrown all of that carbon out the window. We could also take and build a code minimum open cell spray foam, first generation blowing agent building on, an easily accessible city lot where all the materials are close by and the workers live, within a quarter mile, and it's going to perform better than that ultra crunchy carbon sequestering building.
Or is the building necessary in the first place?
Exactly. Well, this is my world that I've been living in. Dan Colbert made a comment years ago that really struck with me, that he did a project where, it was deep energy retrofit, big expansion, so on and so forth. And in hindsight, the best thing that they could have done was buy a Prius for one of his employees to drive the 30 miles to and from. It would have been the best sense economically, and it would have done the most benefit to the environment for that project. So there's a lot of things. It's important. I'm with you, Christine. I'm with everybody here that cares about carbon. We need to pay attention to it, because if we're not measuring it, we're not analyzing it, we can't make a judgment on it. But I'm a little skeptical on how I weight carbon in the equation. I
like how you put that, because I care too. I want to know, but I don't want it to turn into something sort of akin to a blower door, like a pass fail, or like that we perform to the criteria, as opposed to having it be just another thing that we look at and we weigh in the whole rest of the context. Because then you perform to the test, and that's not. I just don't think that if we did that, our industry would be better off as a whole. So if I could trust us to just think about it and apply, like we're doing right now, apply professional judgment to it, that would be great. But I wouldn't want to see it like codified in, or I think it could be, let me put it another way. I think that it could be really irresponsibly codified, to where we encourage people to game the system and show things that are like, seem to be more efficient but aren't.
It's like the lead bike rack debacle that everyone always,
Right. Do we want to? Yeah. Or anyway, one of my buddies, he's not on Instagram anymore, but Foster Lyons, I work with him on a lot of stuff, and he talks about how, like, at a certain level, like the one day that you accidentally leave your garage door open, well, if you get to a level of efficiency, the one day that you leave the garage door open, it like erases all of the detailing savings that you've done. Like I have an extra ½ inch of insulation around my window openings, or whatever it is. Like, there's a point of silliness to this, where the context, or when you zoom into that one thing, it looks hugely significant. So what's the difference between using ½ an inch of insulation around something or using a ¼ inch? Well, that's 50% difference, right? Or maybe I've had beer. I'm not good at math right now, but compared to the whole building, like, are you kidding? We're talking about the depth of the insulation around a window, a tiny opening that represents a 0.1% of the whole building. Anyway.
And not to be dismissive, I'm in that same vein where, people drill in and they're worried about the difference between the $200 bath faucet and the $500 bath faucet. That $300 difference, I'm going to destroy that by backing the lull over the end of a pile of TJIs by accident on the job site.
There you go.
Or you're going to.
It's part of the job.
I think Steve Basic said on this week's podcast that $300 faucet is going to cost you $600 in the end, when I have to pay the plumber to come back in 2 years to replace it, because you didn't pay for the $500 faucet in the first place. But I think this is a great thing for next year's competition. Connor, I'm talking to you, is that maybe carbon and life cycle is the narrative. That's what we need them to write about, that they've thought about it, that they have this process, right? Because we're having this whole discussion, and it's not a judging criteria, right? So we can judge the criteria on whatever, but we want them to kind of open their mind to these big ideas that we haven't, as you can hear all of us, like everything you guys said, I totally agree with all of that, right? Maybe it wasn't a judging criteria. It was information, because things that we can do here in the Northeast would be so incredibly carbon intense to do in other parts of the country. You'd never recommend it. You just wouldn't do it.
Like there's the contrarian entry here, which is in climate zone 3, and it's like a texture 111 code built wall assembly. And I'm looking at that. I'm like, no way. I'm like, but it's on zone 3. I'm like, you could live in a tent
I know.
in San Diego.
I know.
I'm like, I can't fault this. I can't fault this. It totally makes sense for its setting, and it's tough to judge things on that comparison because I'm so used to R40 walls. R15's just fine there, really.
The one
Context
thing I would
is
say
important.
about that wall, I liked it a lot for that application. I thought the context was obviously really important. So they're using interior air control for this contrarian wall. And I have lived in California, in San Diego, and it was indeed climate paradise. It was unbelievable. What it was not was acoustic paradise, where that interior air control, people say that it's a good air barrier, and you can do this. I know that there are people who do this very, very well. A lot of people do this very well. I, early in my career, worked for Chris Benedict in New York City. She did gut rehabs all the time using interior air control, and she did a fabulous job. I blower door tested those apartments myself, and they would hit passive house standards routinely. So you can do a good job, but a lot of times people don't. And even though it doesn't really matter that much from a comfort perspective, a thermal comfort perspective, and probably even not that much from an energy perspective, it's super inconvenient because you're densely packed because California is expensive and you hear your neighbors all the time.
I think that takes us pretty well into where we're headed already. I mean, this competition's not even halfway done, and we're already talking about how we can fix it and make it better for next year, which is, by the way, the goal of the competition is to constantly try to improve. So it's working. It's all working, Connor. Solid job. The idea of improving the competition for next year is fantastic. I know that as soon as I saw the submissions, I immediately thought, oh man, what did I do to my builder friends? Like, where are the people who are hands-on? It's a design competition, but I design stuff and I'm a hands-on guy. I've drawn it up on the scrap of, 2x12 that was on site. And that's how I figured out how to do the next detail. Cause it certainly wasn't on my plan set because the architect was underpaid. So they didn't have time to detail it for me. So I had to figure it out. So now how do we get this next phase? The improvements that are suggested are great improvements. I totally agree. And I knew that we were going to take heat for the criteria not being weighted or being weighted evenly when they're not supposed to be even. I mean, frankly, we could have had a very short judging period if we were like, what does it cost? Because that's what my client's first question is almost every time.
Yep.
What's it cost? Oh, that's over my budget. Okay, well, that failed. We have 0 winning assemblies. I can't afford to build any of these walls. Well, maybe the contrarian, maybe that Larson Truss one, maybe. So the field gets really narrow really fast when you go to that pass-fail mentality, and it's not as productive a conversation. So we can improve the criteria. We can improve the weighting of the judging. We can do a lot of pulling the levers and turning the dials. But one of the things that I thought Connor was really onto when we got the submissions in was he said, we got a ton of looks, but we only got this many people that were like, you know what? I'm putting 2 weeks into this. I've got the time. I'm a student. I have the time and the resources and the desire all at once. Oh, and by the way, I'm a student. Like, that's a big ask. This was a lot of work for the judges to spend hours parsing what was left after these people editorialized and clipped and trimmed and improved and modified these assemblies. This was a big ask. So how do we make that ask more palatable to people that actually want to put stuff together with their hands and design? Not that these people don't put things together with their hands. That's dismissive, and I didn't mean it that way. These students, I'm sure, are across multiple disciplines, but it very much reads as a design. I'm good at CAD. This is my SketchUp skills. This is my background.
I bet the hardest part for them, I'm just guessing, but this is the hardest part for me in design as well. But I bet the hardest part for them was actually designing or knowing how this stuff was being built, right? They didn't just submit a 2D section of the wall. They had to submit, like they had to build it. So they had to show, like, how is the roof attached? What's the foundation? So they ended up actually having to do a lot of design work to justify just the 2D section. So they're only being evaluated on the 2D section, but I would bet that they spent 90% of their time working out how to actually build the stupid thing, which is the hardest part when I'm detailing something. Like if I'm doing a window detail, the difficulty is not in connecting the control layers. I mean, or the real difficulty, I know I have to connect the control layers, whatever, that's okay. Yeah, you get it. The idea or the difficult part is like, how am I going to physically support the elements that I need to support in the right order to actually do this? It's the control layers that comes at the very end. The hard stuff is like, where does this stuff go?
I always thought it would be really cool because I taught building science to both the construction and the architecture department at the same school, that if the whole class did it and they decided what wall assembly, right? You got into partnerships, you narrowed it down, everybody got to vote in the class onto which one they were going to submit. And then you had to give it to somebody else to build a mock-up of it. How cool would that be? So I know not all schools have kind of both departments, but like maybe you could partner with, like maybe universities could partner together, or, maybe if you only had one department, you could learn some of the drawing stuff, or you could partner somebody to put your drawing stuff together. Like it would be fun. I think you'd have to start sooner. You'd have to start Sweet 16 in like January to get to building some things in March, maybe.
But Emily, didn't you find like in architecture school, I didn't even know like dimensional lumber.
Well, actually, in architecture school, Penn State had a material science class, and he bought a bunch of 2x4s and bolts, and we worked in groups, and we had to build things out of it that we could disassemble, and then the next group built something else. We built a pirate ship.
Class, Emily. You're describing
one class. Yes, it was terrible. One class. We did other building projects, but yes, that one class. But it was cool. And I think that was huge for architecture school.
When I draw stuff all the time, I'm like, wait a second, I'm not even talking about this. I'm talking about this other thing, but I have to show this thing that's next to it.
Right.
Is what I'm drawing even possible? Is it realistic? Is it like, and I get attacked on this on Instagram all the time. Not attacked, that's a terrible thing to say. It gets pointed out to me when I misrepresent something. Someone's like, yeah, you wouldn't build it like that, or a real person wouldn't build it like that. Anyway, I applaud the students for actually doing that, because I would not have been able to do that as a student. I really would. Yeah. Maybe they're getting better now especially with digital tools. And I guess I still had the internet when I was in graduate school and learning this stuff, but there was nowhere near the sort of library of details available online that exists now. But I wouldn't have known, even with
the digital tools though. I mean, I think the builders in the group can tell you that it still doesn't tell you how sticky some material is going to be, or how hard it is to put it up on a ladder that's 2 stories in the air, and like all kinds of, that's some of the feedback I got, like, oh, this would have been great for this fully adhered WRB if we would have put it on in the ground. Like, you should have said something. Like, doing this on a ladder on the 2nd story is not so great. Like,
right. In fairness, so it's called Wall Assembly Suite 16, but realistically, all these students are submitting a full envelope.
Yeah.
We're seeing base joint connections, we're seeing wall to roof assembly connections. So we're kind of trying to just pay attention to the wall performance, but there is some conversation happening in there around some of the roof details and stuff like that, because they kind of play into the whole assembly in a whole.
Oh yeah. I'm glad they're included too, because that it influences constructibility, or even like how reasonable something is to begin with. I love that it's included.
And not to get too kumbaya on us all here, but the real winner of this whole thing is all of us getting to have this conversation. As an industry, this is what's driving the industry forward, is all of us coming together and making these efforts together to have these conversations and share this knowledge, because that's really what's going to push us forward. So the $1,000 is great, but this is more valuable.
I think what you're talking about is exactly what this is supposed to talk about. Is The wall is not in isolation of the envelope. The wall connects to a foundation, it connects to a roof. If you pull back a bit, if we want to build high performance structures and assemblies, we need both the designers to have an understanding of the buildability. We need understanding within the builders to understand the approach to the building science and the detailing from the architectural perspective. And if we can start to learn each other's language, I think the most powerful thing is if a trade school like us can teach SketchUp, if only to take a set of drawings that's not detailed very well and build that 3D model of the actual assembly. And likewise, have an architectural student or interior design student build the assembly that they're designing in their studio class. To start to learn each other's language, we start to be less siloed, because conventionally, a lot of schools do this well. But when I went to interior design school, we went to our building, really great courses, but we never went to the architecture school, even though upon graduation, we will work hand in hand.
Yeah.
The builder, upon graduation from our school, we have a construction technology program, but we're different buildings, different programs. But upon graduation, we are expected to work together. And I think the competition highlights how do we start that unity understanding early, learn each other's professional language and our disciplines, so we can be better communicators and achieve our client goals and our budgets and build really great buildings.
You guys are wrapping up the show early. When you say these poignant things, Ben going kumbaya and then Connor wrapping it up, man, we got 7 more minutes. Come on, guys. That's too soon. Now you're gonna have to step it up. You just keep raising the bar. I don't know how to do anything over here.
I'm thrilled by the discussion. The whole point of this was, for me, was to have a discussion, have students be part of this community. I mean, all of you, sponsor amazing discussions through all of your platforms, whether that's web, your IG platforms, or through the publications, through the magazines. And for them to be a part of that is really exciting. And to take your feedback and learn how to make this, either work on the criteria, work on the weighting so that certain sections are worth more than others. That's all how we evolve teaching, right? We teach a course, we learn from it, we learn the objectives.
This is great. I'm sure there's going to be an evolution. We're going to think of stuff to improve on, but this is fantastic the way it is. What a huge treat to get to review, and then I can only imagine the value to a student too. Really, really cool.
Well, and I think too, if you're really doing it like Sweet 16 basketball, right? The first 8 groups get through, then they have to submit something else, right? They got to play another game. So maybe the first part is your wall system assembly, whatever. Next game is your written analysis on your carbon or your life cycle or whatever, or your partnership with the other school to see how buildable it was. Was it really buildable? There could be, I am not volunteering to do any of this. I'm just saying it could be really cool if there were different parts, or maybe, the judging criteria, you only get certain parts of their submission in phase 1. Phase 2, it's okay, you made it from phase 1 to phase 2. How good is this in the next thing? It could be kind of fun and interactive for the students, because I do hope, like Christine said in the very beginning, I hope that they all know that any judgments that we had on it was all just, we do this all the time in our own field. You can hear tonight that we had a lively discussion on how to do different things, right? There's so many ways to do it. It's simply a way for all of us to get better, right?
Although I have to say, if I knew during architecture school that the critique would be the crit process, really, and the pinup process would be a feature of my entire career going forward, I don't know if I would have made it. I don't know. That was hard emotionally, and I guess you get tougher, but. Hey, I had a question, Connor, for you. Do you ever interact with Chris Timisk?
Briefly.
So he might be somebody we want to bring in on this. He's also at George. I just Googled it because I was like, is he at George Brown?
Yeah, he is.
He is. So Chris Timisk is a total rock star building scientist, also teaches at George Brown. And he's a specialist in mass timber, actually. So he might be a good person
he's wonderful. And that's kind of brings things together. How do you, for students, is how do you make it visceral, right? I think what's so cool about blow-door testing for a builder is you now have a way to measure and put a metric against at least one part of your assembly, the air tightness.
Right.
And I think what's even fun with this, there's a couple of builders in Toronto who do this. They rent a theatrical smoker. So during their blower door test, they smoke the whole building, and you can see it. And I think when you start to understand performance in a way that you can see and feel, it isn't just like a score you get from a rating system. That's exciting. And the school does have a giant hot box, a giant assembly you can slide assemblies into and test thermal performance on the actual built assembly and not just a model. And that can be really cool, is to take the top 4, have a school like ours or another school in another part of the country, build them physically, and then test the physical assemblies so that the actual knowledge is more palatable or more tangible versus just like an expert from like Woofy Passive or from Woofy. That'd be super exciting.
So we're in agreement then. We're going to move the contest from just theoretical into tangible somehow, and at very least mock-ups, so that people can really get a better feel for it. I think that's definitely going to extend the timeline. These things take a lot of effort to put together.
Well,
But
maybe that's room for the sponsorship, by the way.
I think the sponsors are ahead of you, Christine. There's a ton of material packages donated with the winner. So it's not just cash to the winning student, but their program gets a ton of material to,
Oh, cool.
oh yeah, it's an amazing generosity. Rockwool, Sega, T-Stud, Intelligent Membranes, all offered immediately. They're like, what materials can we send to the instructors that'll help them to teach the students?
It's so great.
Awesome.
It's so great. Because I think that's what you said, Emily. And for you to understand the difference between a tuck tape, nothing wrong with it, it's very appropriate for a certain context, against a different kind of tape, you have to see it and touch it. The thing that has to happen for architectural students to know how to detail it, and for building students to know that piece of tape is $9 that you just scrunched up and you taped your ripped pants with, right? Like, that's important. Like, this happens. Just, I saw it on the site last week.
I love that you I love that you said that about the tape too, because I also think it could be really interesting for the students to find out, is it actually readily available, right? That's always, if you go back and you critique at architecture school, I always love the theoretical ideas that come out, and then you're sort of like, not exactly practical. Cool idea, but like, how are you going to get that here? How are you going to hold it up? Like this green roof idea is great, except for everything in Maine dies for the winter time. Like, we've got 9 months of winter, and now you've got a ton of snow on top of that. So now you're holding up dirt and the snow and the, like, how big is the timber inside to have this green roof that's alive for like 3 months of the year? You know, like it's so much fun to hear them talk about all these cool ideas, but you know, it's, if you don't know if you can get it, it's a cool theory, right? Which is great for this year's competition. Like, they thought about it a little bit, but they didn't have to get it. But like, if you have to actively try to get it,
you can cost it. You can figure out, play contractor for the designers, figure the lead time on these materials. So yeah, you want to use Gutex. What's the lead time for you right now for 475 to get it? You want to use a window from somewhere in Europe. What's the lead time right now? How does it fit in with the rest of your schedule? Because that's all what this is about, is that dialogue.
What are you going to do when you run 4% short on your material takeoffs on that Gutex? You know, these are real things that we deal with in the field. Not saying this didn't happen to me. I did good.
Use Rockwool.
Solid extra. But it's these are realistic things, and there's a lot to be said for Travis. I think you were talking about Jake mentioning it before about using things that you get at the lumberyard. There's a lot to be said for that. But also, don't let that wariness pigeonhole you into only using those products. It's also good to go out and try new products. Jake used to always bust my butt because I used the European tapes. And what am I saying now? Now he's got European tapes on his windows. And I get it. There's an argument for keeping things local and keeping things simple. There's a lot to be said for that. But there's also a lot to be said about trying stuff that takes a little more effort, when it really just comes down to you being able to supply the foresight to remember to order it in time.
Yeah. And that's, like, just to say one thing for the trade schools, what we're trying to do now is, trying to teach, it's in 2 years, I can tell you how difficult it is to teach someone starting how to use a measuring tape and then all the way through on how to build complex assemblies.
Yeah.
But trying to build up these, these physical libraries, like, again, I talked about being jealous of different people. There's a school called BCIT in Vancouver does an excellent job of having like the interior design school has a physical material library where you can touch things. They have a physical assembly library. And that, I think, is magical to see what does a code build assembly look like in your state. Let's roll it out and talk about it. What does a modified high performance assembly look like? Let's pull it out and talk about it. And they're physical. I think if we can get those in both trade schools and architectural schools, so when you're considering, how much glazing you want in that rendering, maybe you have to do the actual heat loss and go, oh my God, it faces north. No, that's crazy. It's that then you need to render with people wearing parkas on, and if that's not your joie de vivre, then maybe get tuned up. But yeah, making things physical, I think, is really important.
I think we've done a pretty good job of laying out where we were, where we're at, and kind of where we're headed. I think that there's going to be an awful lot of excited people tuning in on the 6th to see who wins this $1,200 prize package and all the cool stuff for their program. And the only thing that I feel remiss, we did not mention our ninth submittal. And so that will be the big surprise on 4/6. You'll get to hear about the super secret 9th submittal that did not get entered for a very unique but good positive reason. And there's going to be something special for that entrant. So if he's watching tonight, you were not forgotten. You were not intentionally excluded in the way that you think, but for a good reason. So everyone
wild card.
Tell us what's coming up. So
yeah.
Tell us what's coming up. Also, so that I can write it down.
Thank you, Christine.
Asking for a friend.
So
asking for a friend when I have to show up.
So if you've completed your judging, you're well on your way. We have another show coming up on this topic. We basically are going to move to the final 4 based on the judging that's been completed. That's going to give Chris Magwood at Endeavor Center and Enrico Bonalari. I nailed it. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. I saw this because I watched Connor's video, by the way, on how to use this, but I guess I missed this part. Now I see the date. Okay.
Yeah. So next stage is to get those analyses and models complete. And then we will reveal the big reveal 4/6, April 6th. It's a Tuesday, which is different from the National BS and Beer Show because this started at the KC level, but obviously everyone's invited. And that's when we'll go ahead and break down the competition from there. We'll have all the modeling available. There will be plenty of beers to drink and lots of stories and discussion about how we got to the winner. And we'll get to the winner live through voting, right, Connor? Isn't this how we've got this structured?
100%. So we'll do a better job at maybe putting on the page on the website with those details, with that process. We'll put the links there at wallsummit.com so all of you can join us. But yeah, on that live night, the top 4 we'll share what we learned about their performance modeling. We'll get some insights, at least for a discussion around the embodied carbon of some of the materials. We'll, through voting of the judges and live voting, we'll get that down to 2. And then we'll figure out who is the winner and who takes home a bunch of stuff from our amazing.
So all on that, that's a busy day.
It is. It's a full day. We packed in the.
And that's on the Tuesday, the 6th.
Yep.
Correct. From 4 to 6 Central Time. So we get a little extra half hour.
Got it.
And I will post it on the BS and Beer Show for anybody who's tuning in tonight live from BS and Beer or watching this on the BS and Beer replay. We'll put the link to join the KC BS and Beer event on the main BS and Beer page.
Excellent.
And
love that you're all pulling it together. Thanks everyone for your time, not just the judges and the panelists and the hosts, but especially to our audience and even more than that to the students. This is fantastic. Thanks for joining us.
Request.
Please.
If anyone here knows of a building trade school, an architectural school that teaches assemblies and building science, of a interior design school teaching assemblies and building science, or a college level school teaching carpentry, please tell them to go to wallsummit.com and just email us with their school's details. So next year we run this again. We have a much larger list of schools to notify about this early, hopefully get this into their curriculum and help support them so their students can help work with us and share their ideas in the future.
We're going to need a coffee sponsorship for the judges.
Oh man, I love it. Well, since Fine Home Building charges us by the minute every minute we go over, I got to close this thing down. Thanks again to everyone who joined us. Obviously, that was a
everybody.
joke. Appreciate it. Good night.
all.
Thank you.
Good night.